Have you ever been blindsided by the person you trusted most? Imagine your world crumbling in a single moment, inside a courtroom, when your ex-husband accuses you of being a monster. This is the story of Isabel Hart, a woman whose life was systematically dismantled by lies. Her ex painted her as a violent abuser to the world, seeking to ruin her reputation and her spirit. He thought he had the perfect plan, the perfect narrative. But he made one fatal miscalculation. He never imagined that his own mistress, the woman he left Isabel for, would be the one to expose his web of deceit. Get ready for a story of betrayal, an alliance you'll never see coming, and the incredible power of a woman reclaiming her truth. The courtroom air was thick with the scent of old paper and cheap coffee, a stale perfume that clung to the polished wood of the pews and the heavy velvet curtains. For Isabel Hart, it was the smell of suffocation. Each breath felt like a betrayal of the woman she used to be, the confident, award-winning architect who could command a boardroom with a single glance. Now, she was just a defendant, her name reduced to a case number scrawled on a docket. She sat ramrod straight, her spine a steel rod against the unforgiving bench. Her lawyer, Dana Ruiz, a woman whose weary eyes had seen too many domestic disputes turn ugly, sat beside her, a calming, solid presence. Across the aisle, looking every bit the aggrieved victim, was Gavin Ward, her ex-husband, the man whose laughter once filled their sun-drenched Soho loft, whose hands had once traced the blueprints of her dreams. Today, those same hands were steepled, resting on the table before him as he conferred with his slick, pinstripe-suited lawyer. He caught her eye for a fraction of a second, and the look he gave her wasn't one of anger or sadness. It was one of triumph. A cold, calculated glint that made the blood in her veins run cold. It had all started 6 months ago, with a leak to a gossip blog. Prominent architect Isabel Hart's picture-perfect marriage to philanthropist Gavin Ward shattered by allegations of abuse. The headline was a punch to the gut. The story, a masterpiece of fiction. It painted Gavin, the charming, beloved founder of a children's art charity, as a long-suffering husband, enduring years of Isabel's supposed volcanic temper, her violent outbursts, her emotional cruelty. It was absurd, laughable even. Isabel was passionate, yes, ambitious, driven. But violent? Never. Their arguments had been about his reckless spending, his increasingly frequent business trips, his emotional distance. The real abuse, the slow, insidious kind, had been his. The gaslighting that made her question her own memory. The constant, subtle belittling of her achievements, disguised as jokes. The way he'd isolate her from her friends, calling them jealous or a bad influence. But Gavin was a master storyteller. He had woven a narrative so compelling, so detailed, that even people who had known Isabel for years began to look at her with a flicker of doubt in their eyes. He'd produced doctored text messages, selectively edited audio clips from their arguments, and even a witness, a disgruntled former assistant Isabel had fired for incompetence, who was willing to lie for a price. All rise. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Evelyn Monroe, entered, her black robe sweeping behind her. She settled into her high-backed chair, her gaze sweeping over the courtroom, lingering for a moment on Isabel. It wasn't a look of sympathy. It was one of tired appraisal, as if Isabel were just another messy divorce case cluttering her otherwise orderly day. Gavin's lawyer, a man named Noah Ellison, whose reputation for vicious cross-examinations preceded him, stood up. Your Honor, we are here today to present evidence of Mr. Ward's suffering at the hands of Ms. Hart. We will demonstrate a clear and consistent pattern of physical and psychological abuse that has left my client emotionally scarred and in fear for his safety. Dana squeezed Isabel's hand under the table. Breathe, she whispered. He's just grandstanding. But the words hit their mark. The small contingent of reporters in the back scribbled furiously in their notepads, in fear for his safety. The phrase echoed in the cavernous room. Gavin, a man who was 6'2" and a former college athlete, afraid of her. It was a performance, and he was playing the role of a lifetime. The first witness was Gavin himself. He took the stand, his expression a carefully crafted mask of sorrow and reluctance. He spoke in a low, trembling voice, detailing fabricated incidents with heartbreaking precision. He talked about a time she'd supposedly thrown a heavy crystal vase at him during an argument, narrowly missing his head. Isabel remembered that night vividly. She had been celebrating a major contract, and Gavin had gotten drunk and belittled her in front of her colleagues. She had picked up the vase, yes, but only to move it to a safer spot as she packed a bag to spend the night at a hotel, desperate to escape his drunken tirade. He described how she would fly into rages, her eyes black with fury, her words like shards of glass. He was twisting her passion, her frustration with his lies, into something monstrous. He was taking her strength and rebranding it as a weapon. With each lie that fell from his lips, Isabel felt a piece of herself chip away. She could feel the jury's eyes on her, their expressions shifting from neutral curiosity to suspicion, then to outright condemnation. They didn't see the successful architect, the loving daughter, the loyal friend. They saw the monster Gavin was so skillfully painting. The most damning piece of evidence was a photograph. Ellison projected it onto a large screen for the whole court to see. It showed Gavin with a nasty purplish bruise on his cheekbone. "Mr. Ward," Ellison said, his voice dripping with synthetic empathy, "can you tell the court how you sustained this injury?" Gavin looked down, taking a shaky breath. "It was after the gallery benefit last spring. I had mentioned that I thought one of her designs was a bit derivative. It was a stupid thing to say. I shouldn't have said it. She just snapped. She slapped me hard. Her ring caught my cheek. Isabel's breath hitched. Her ring. Her grandmother's ring. A simple gold band she never took off. She remembered that night, too. Gavin had come home late, smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers. They had argued, and in her distress, she had gestured wildly, her hand accidentally brushing his face as she turned away. She had apologized immediately, horrified. He had laughed it off, told her it was nothing. Now he was using that accidental, insignificant moment as the cornerstone of his case. The gavel fell, signaling a recess for lunch. The sound cracked through the tension like a gunshot. Isabel felt hollowed out, a fragile shell. As people filed out, a reporter shoved a microphone in her face. "Ms. Hart, do you have any comment on Mr. Ward's testimony?" She couldn't speak. The words were lodged in her throat, choked by a rising tide of despair. Dana shielded her, guiding her towards a side exit. As they pushed through the doors into the relative quiet of the hallway, Isabel's legs finally gave out. She slumped against the cool marble wall, the fight draining out of her. "I can't do this, Dana," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He's going to win. He's going to destroy me." Dana knelt beside her, her expression firm. "Listen to me, Isabel. This is what he wants. He wants you to break. We knew this would be ugly. But it's just his side of the story. Our turn is coming. You are not a monster. We just have to prove it." But as Isabel looked back at the closed courtroom doors, she could almost feel Gavin's smug satisfaction seeping through the wood. He had set the stage, told his story, and the world was listening. And she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The days following the initial hearing bled into a gray, featureless landscape of anxiety. The world that had once felt so vibrant and full of promise had shrunk to the four walls of Isabel's new, sterile apartment. It was a place she'd chosen for its anonymity and its state-of-the-art security system, but it felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. The floor-to-ceiling windows that should have offered a stunning view of the city skyline only seemed to reflect her own isolation. The whispers started almost immediately. A text from a client, politely postponing a major project indefinitely. An invitation to a charity gala that was rescinded with a flimsy excuse about rescheduling. Her oldest friend, Tara, who had been her maid of honor, now answered her calls with a strained, hesitant tone. "I just think, maybe you should lay low for a while, Belle," Tara had said, her voice thin over the phone. "You know how people talk. This is all just so messy." Messy. That was the word everyone used. It was a polite euphemism for toxic, for damaged goods. Isabel Hart, the brilliant architect, was now messy. Her name, once a symbol of innovation and success, was now inextricably linked to a scandal. She would Google herself in moments of weakness, a masochistic ritual that always ended in tears. The headlines were brutal, the comment sections a cesspool of vitriol. "She has crazy eyes. I always knew there was something off about her. Typical career woman, probably too busy climbing the corporate ladder to be a decent human being." I believe him. Men can be victims too. Justice for Gavin. The hashtag felt like a physical blow. Gavin, ever the marketing genius, had cultivated his victimhood with chilling expertise. His social media was a curated gallery of sorrow. Photos of him looking pensive, walking alone on a beach. Vague, inspirational quotes about survival and finding the light after darkness. He never mentioned her by name, of course. He didn't have to. The narrative was set, and he was its tragic hero. Meanwhile, glimpses of his new life would occasionally pierce through Isabel's self-imposed isolation. A paparazzi photo of him leaving a trendy restaurant, his arm draped possessively around a stunning young woman. Her name was Sophie Lang. She was an art curator, 20-something, with wide, doe-like eyes and a cascade of honey-blonde hair. The articles called her Gavin's new love, the woman who was helping him heal. Isabel looked at Sophie's face and felt a bitter cocktail of envy and pity. She was the replacement, the upgrade. The woman who was getting the charming, public version of Gavin, while Isabel was left with the wreckage of the man he was in private. She probably believed his lies, too. She probably saw Isabel as the crazy ex-wife, the monster from Gavin's bedtime stories. One evening, Dana came over to the apartment, carrying 2 large containers of Thai food and a bottle of wine. She found Isabel sitting on the floor, surrounded by old photo albums, her face streaked with tears. "This is a bad idea," Dana said gently, nudging an album with her foot. It was open to a picture of Isabel and Gavin on their honeymoon in Bali, their faces glowing with happiness. It felt like a photo of 2 strangers. "I'm trying to find something, anything," Isabel said, her voice hoarse. "Proof, something to show he's lying." "We have your testimony, Isabel. We have character witnesses." "Who? Tara, who can barely look at me? My old assistant, who he paid off? My parents, who he'll paint as biased? Dana, his story is perfect. It's a seamless fabrication. Every lie is built on a kernel of truth he's twisted into something unrecognizable." Dana sighed, sinking onto the sofa. She opened the wine, pouring them both a generous glass. "His perfection is his weakness, Isabel. People aren't perfect. Their stories aren't seamless. Noah Ellison is a shark, but he's an arrogant one. He thinks he has this in the bag. We just need one crack, one inconsistency." They spent the evening combing through old emails, text messages, and journal entries. It was a painful archaeological dig through the ruins of her marriage. They found plenty of evidence of Gavin's gaslighting, his financial manipulation, his emotional neglect, but nothing that directly contradicted his claims of physical abuse. He had been too clever for that. He had laid the groundwork for this for years, isolating her, chipping away at her confidence, making her feel like she was the unstable one. "It's no use," Isabel said finally, pushing a stack of papers away. "He's thought of everything." "We're not done yet," Dana insisted, though her own voice lacked its usual conviction. That night, Isabel couldn't sleep. The city lights outside her window seemed to mock her, a glittering testament to a world she was no longer a part of. She felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of her own life. Her ambition, once a roaring fire, had been reduced to a pile of cold ashes. Gavin hadn't just taken her reputation. He had taken her very sense of self. He had held up a distorted mirror, and she was starting to see its monstrous reflection as the truth. She was scrolling mindlessly through her phone, deleting old contacts, purging the digital remnants of her past life, when a new message popped up. It was from a number she didn't recognize, one that wasn't blocked. Her thumb hovered over the delete button, assuming it was another reporter or a hate message that had slipped through. But something made her pause. She opened it. The message contained only 7 words, but they sent an electric jolt through her exhausted body. "He's lying about everything. I can prove it." Isabel stared at the screen, her heart pounding against her ribs. It had to be a trick, a trap set by Gavin to make her look even more unhinged. Who would send a message like this? Who would dare to defy him? Her fingers trembled as she typed a reply. "Who is this?" The response came back almost instantly, and Isabel felt the air leave her lungs in a sudden, sharp gasp. "My name is Sophie. You need to meet me." The name on the screen seemed to burn itself into Isabel's retinas. Sophie, the Mistress. The beautiful young replacement who was supposed to be Gavin's salvation. It made no sense. Why would she, of all people, reach out to Isabel? It had to be a cruel, elaborate hoax. Gavin was pulling the strings, trying to lure her into a trap, to gather more evidence of her supposed instability, her obsessive nature. He would probably have paparazzi waiting to photograph their meeting, twisting it into a story of a jealous ex-wife harassing his new girlfriend. Isabel's first instinct was to block the number, to show the message to Dana, to dismiss it as another one of Gavin's sick games. But a sliver of something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, fragile and terrifying, lodged itself in her chest. "I can prove it." The words were a lifeline thrown into the churning waters of her despair. What if it was real? What if this was the crack Dana had been talking about? She spent the rest of the night pacing her apartment, a caged animal wrestling with an impossible choice. Trusting Sophie was like trusting a snake that had already bitten you, but ignoring her felt like surrendering the last vestiges of her fight. The courtroom, the whispers, the condemning headlines, they had all pushed her to the very edge of belief in her own sanity. Gavin had almost convinced her that she was the monster he described. This message, this single glimmer of an alternate reality, was the only thing pulling her back. By dawn, her decision was made. It was a reckless gamble, one that Dana would surely advise against, but it was a gamble she had to take. She couldn't live in the shadows anymore. She texted back, her hands clammy. "Where and when? No cameras, no one else." The reply was immediate. "The Botanical Garden, by the old conservatory, tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come alone, I will too." The Botanical Garden. It was a smart choice. Public yet full of secluded corners where 2 people could talk without being easily overheard. It was also a place Isabel hadn't been to in years, a place with no memories of Gavin. The next 24 hours were excruciating. Every ping of her phone made her jump. Every shadow in the corner of her eye looked like a spy. She didn't tell Dana. She couldn't. Dana's job was to be cautious, to protect her from legal pitfalls. This was something Isabel had to do for herself, a leap of faith off a crumbling cliff. She dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, clothes that made her feel invisible. She pulled her dark hair back into a simple ponytail and wore no makeup. She wanted to look like herself, not the caricature Gavin had created. The air in the Botanical Garden was cool and damp, fragrant with the smell of earth and blooming roses. It was a world away from the sterile courtroom and her suffocating apartment. For a moment, she felt a sense of peace. She walked down a winding stone path, her boots crunching on the gravel, her senses on high alert. The old conservatory was a beautiful, neglected structure of glass and rusted iron, tucked away in a less trafficked part of the gardens. Vines crawled up its sides, and inside, overgrown ferns pressed against the dusty panes. And there, sitting on a weathered stone bench near the entrance, was Sophie Lang. She was even more striking in person. She wore a simple trench coat, her blonde hair pulled back, but her face was pale and drawn. The doe-eyed innocence from the paparazzi photos was gone, replaced by a deep, weary anxiety that Isabel recognized instantly. It was the look of a woman walking on eggshells. Sophie stood up as Isabel approached, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. She looked terrified. "Thank you for coming," Sophie said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not sure why I'm here," Isabel replied, keeping her distance. Her voice was colder than she intended, a defense mechanism she couldn't switch off. "If this is some kind of game, you can tell Gavin it won't work." Sophie flinched, shaking her head vehemently. "No, this isn't a game, I swear. He doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm at a gallery meeting." Her eyes darted around nervously, as if expecting Gavin to materialize from behind a rhododendron bush. "Why would you do this?" Isabel asked, the question hanging heavy in the air between them. "You're with him. You're the one who's healing him. Why would you risk that to help me?" Sophie let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "Healing him? Is that what the articles say?" She looked down at her hands, her knuckles white as she gripped her purse. "He's not the man everyone thinks he is, Isabel. You know that better than anyone. I was a fool. I believed him. I believed everything he said about you." She finally looked up, and Isabel was stunned to see tears welling in her wide eyes. "He told me you were jealous, possessive, violent. He showed me the pictures, the texts. He was so convincing, so broken. I felt sorry for him. I wanted to save him." The words were a strange, painful echo of Isabel's own past. She remembered the early days with Gavin, his stories of a difficult childhood, his vulnerability that had seemed so genuine. He had a way of making you feel like you were the only one who truly understood him, the only one who could fix his pain. "And now?" Isabel prompted, her curiosity overriding her suspicion. "Now I know it was all a lie," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "It started subtly, the same way it did with you, I'm guessing. The little criticisms, the jokes at my expense, the way he'd check my phone, question where I was going. He needed to know where I was, who I was with, every second of the day. He said it was because he was scared of losing me, because of the trauma you put him through." She pulled up the sleeve of her trench coat, and Isabel's breath caught in her throat. A dark, ugly bruise, the size of a fist, stained the pale skin of her forearm. It was shaped like fingerprints. "A few nights ago, I got a call from a male colleague about a new exhibit," Sophie continued, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Gavin heard his voice. He lost it. He said I was cheating on him, that I was just like you. He grabbed my arm. She gestured to the bruise. "This is from him trying to calm me down." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This whole time, Isabel had been fighting a ghost, a perfect fabrication. But here was the truth, ugly and undeniable, etched into the skin of the woman who was supposed to be her rival. "He's not just lying about you, Isabel," Sophie said, her eyes pleading. "He's doing the same thing to me, the same cycle. He breaks you down until you don't even know who you are anymore. And I can't let him get away with it. I can't let him destroy you to build his own pedestal." She fumbled in her purse, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unzip it. She pulled out a small, sleek smartphone, not the one Isabel had seen in photos, but a different one. A burner phone. "After that night, I started recording him," Sophie said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. When he talks about the court case, when he brags to his friends about how he's playing everyone for a fool, when he threatens me." She tapped the screen and held the phone out to Isabel. A man's voice, Gavin's voice, filled the quiet garden air. It was distorted by the recording, but it was unmistakably him, dripping with venom and arrogance. "Ha, she's finished. By the time I'm done with her, she won't be able to get a job designing a doghouse. And the best part? Everyone thinks I'm the goddamn saint. They're eating it up. Even you, Sophie. You bought the whole sob story, didn't you? Hook, line, and sinker." The recording ended. The silence that followed was profound. Isabel stood frozen, the sound of Gavin's cruel laughter echoing in her ears. It was real. All of it. The doubt, the whispers, the shadows. They all began to recede, burned away by the raw, undeniable truth of that recording. She looked at Sophie, really looked at her. For the first time. She didn't see a mistress or a rival. She saw an ally, a terrified, brave, and utterly unexpected ally. "He has no idea you're doing this?" Isabel asked, her voice low. Sophie shook her head, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light. "He has no idea who he's dealing with." In that moment, standing in the shadow of the old conservatory, a fragile, dangerous alliance was forged. It wasn't built on friendship or forgiveness, but on a shared, chilling understanding of the man they had both loved and the monster he truly was. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Isabel Hart was no longer alone. The air in Dana Ruiz's office was thick with a tension that even the soothing, minimalist decor couldn't dispel. Isabel and Sophie sat on opposite ends of a plush leather sofa, a silent, yawning gap between them. It had been 2 days since their meeting in the botanical garden, 2 days of clandestine texts and whispered phone calls to arrange this very meeting. Bringing Sophie here, into the heart of her legal battle, was the biggest risk Isabel had ever taken. Dana stood by the window, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable as she looked from Isabel to Sophie and back again. She had listened to their story without interruption, her sharp legal mind processing every detail, every potential pitfall. She had listened to the audio recording from Sophie's burner phone 3 times. "Let me be clear," Dana said finally, turning from the window. Her voice was crisp, professional, cutting through the emotional fog. "You, Sophie, are what we call a hostile witness. You are the opposing party's girlfriend, his new love, as the tabloids so gracefully put it. Your credibility will be attacked from every conceivable angle. Ellison will paint you as a scorned woman, a liar, a fantasist. He will try to destroy you on the stand." Sophie flinched, but didn't look away. "I know," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in the garden. "I'm not doing this because it's easy. I'm doing it because it's right. What he's doing to Isabel, it's what he was starting to do to me. If I don't stop him, he'll just do it to someone else after I'm gone." There was a new steel in Sophie's tone, a resolve forged in fear and anger. In the past 2 days, Isabel had seen a transformation in the younger woman. The initial terror was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it was now overlaid with a fierce determination. She was no longer just a victim. She was a woman fighting back. "He's getting more controlling," Sophie continued, her gaze fixed on Dana. "He installed a tracking app on my primary phone. He questions every receipt, every call. He told me he wants me to quit my job at the gallery. He says he wants to take care of me. But I know what that means. It means he wants to isolate me, to own me." Isabel felt a cold chill of recognition. It was the exact same playbook Gavin had used on her. It had started with grand romantic gestures, suggesting she cut back her hours to enjoy life, offering to handle all their finances so she wouldn't have to worry her pretty little head. At the time, she had mistaken his control for care. By the time she realized it was a cage, the door was already locked. "The burner phone is my only lifeline," Sophie said. "He doesn't know about it. I have more recordings, more texts. He's sloppy when he's angry. He says things. We need more than just recordings of him being a jerk, Dana said, her tone pragmatic. We need him to specifically contradict his testimony. We need him to admit, in his own words, that he lied about the abuse. He will, Sophie said with chilling certainty. He's arrogant. He loves to brag about how clever he is, how he's got everyone fooled. He thinks I'm one of his disciples. He monologues at me, tells me all the details of his master plan. A strange, collaborative energy began to fill the room. The three of them, the wife, the mistress, and the lawyer, huddled together, a secret council of war. They spread out a calendar, marking the days until the next hearing. They had less than 3 weeks. We need to be smart, Dana instructed, her focus absolute. Sophie, your safety is the #1 priority. You cannot give him any reason to suspect. You have to keep playing the part of the devoted, slightly naive girlfriend. I can do that, Sophie said, though a shadow of fear crossed her face. I've been doing it for months. Isabel. Dana turned to her. You need to disappear. No more Googling yourself. No more sad phone calls to friends. We need to project an image of serene confidence. Let the world think you're unbothered. It will drive him crazy. The plan was simple in its concept, but terrifyingly complex in its execution. Sophie would continue to be their inside source, a spy in the enemy camp. She would use her proximity to Gavin to carefully bait him, to get him to talk about the case, to brag about his lies, all while recording him on her secret phone. Isabel and Dana would use the information she gathered to build their counter-narrative, piece by piece. The first few days of their alliance were a masterclass in subterfuge. Sophie would send coded text messages. Thinking of painting the living room might mean she had a new recording. Running low on milk was a signal that Gavin was in a volatile mood and she needed to lay low. They would meet in secret, never in the same place twice. A quiet corner of a library, a noisy coffee shop, once even in the back of a darkened movie theater. During these clandestine meetings, Sophie would pass Isabel a micro-SD card from the burner phone, her hand brushing Isabel's in a fleeting, conspiratorial touch. Listening to the recordings was torturous for Isabel. She had to hear the man she once loved, his voice full of smug satisfaction, detailing the methodical destruction of her life. The bruise photo was a stroke of genius, wasn't it? His voice crackled from the tiny speaker of Dana's laptop. Ellison wanted something visual, something the jury could latch onto. I just enhanced the color a little in Photoshop, made it look angrier. People believe what they see, baby. They don't believe in the nuances. In another recording, he laughed about turning Isabel's assistant against her. Nicole was easy. A little cash, a promise of a good reference. She'd have said Isabel was a satanic cult leader if I'd asked her to. People are so predictable. With each recording, another piece of Gavin's fabricated story crumbled. But with each piece of evidence, the danger to Sophie grew. Isabel saw the strain on the younger woman's face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she jumped at every sudden noise. She was living a double life, performing for an audience of one, knowing that a single misstep could have devastating consequences. One afternoon, they met at a laundromat in a neighborhood neither of them frequented. As the machines rumbled around them, Sophie handed over a new memory card. Her hand was trembling. He almost found the phone, she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. He was looking for his car keys in my purse. I had to create a distraction, knocked over a lamp. It was close, too close. This is too dangerous, Sophie, Isabel said, a knot of guilt tightening in her stomach. We can't ask you to do this. Sophie shook her head, her jaw set. We have to. Last night he was drinking. He started talking about the vase, the one he said you threw at him. She took a deep breath. He admitted he broke it himself, months before, and saved the pieces. He said he cut his own arm on a shard to make it look like he'd been hit with flying glass. Isabel felt sick. The premeditation, The sheer cold-blooded malice of it was beyond anything she could have imagined. "He's a monster," Isabel whispered. "Yes," Sophie agreed, her gaze meeting Isabel's over the folding table. "And we are going to expose him." In that moment, in the mundane, fluorescent-lit laundromat, surrounded by the scent of bleach and tumbling clothes, their bond solidified. They were no longer just the wife and the mistress. They were survivors, and they were united by a single, burning purpose: to make sure Gavin Ward's true face was the last thing the world saw. The alliance, born of desperation, was now their greatest weapon. The war room, as they had come to call Dana's conference room, was a chaotic collage of their counteroffensive. A large whiteboard was covered in a web of connections, timelines, and quotes transcribed from Sophie's recordings. Sticky notes in different colors represented different pieces of evidence: yellow for financial deceit, pink for verbal threats, blue for direct contradictions to his court testimony. It was the anatomy of a lie, dissected and laid bare. Their strategy sessions became a ritual. Isabel, with her architect's mind for structure and detail, would organize the information, creating clear, linear narratives. Sophie, with her intimate, terrifying knowledge of Gavin's psyche, would provide the context, explaining his triggers, his moods, his vulnerabilities. And Dana, the seasoned legal general, would shape it all into a weapon they could use in court. A strange and powerful camaraderie grew between Isabel and Sophie. The initial awkwardness and suspicion had melted away, replaced by a deep, shared understanding. They found themselves finishing each other's sentences, anticipating each other's thoughts. They were two women who should have been mortal enemies, now bound together by a trauma only they could comprehend. One evening, while sifting through a mountain of Gavin's old credit card statements, which Sophie had managed to photograph, they uncovered a pattern. Dozens of charges to high-end jewelry stores, luxury hotels, and expensive restaurants that corresponded with dates Gavin had claimed to be on solo meditation retreats to deal with the stress of his marriage. "He told me he was finding himself," Isabel said with a hollow laugh, staring at a $5,000 charge from a boutique hotel in the Hamptons. "I guess he found himself with a platinum credit card and a string of, well, not me." "He was cheating on you long before he met me," Sophie said softly, pointing to a charge from 2 years prior. "I didn't even live in New York then. He told me you were his one and only, that he'd never even looked at another woman until the marriage became unbearable." The discovery wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the foundation of his narrative. He had painted himself as a devoted husband, driven away by an abusive wife. The statements proved he was a serial philanderer who had been building his escape route for years. To flesh out their case, they began to delve into their own memories, forcing themselves to relive moments they had long tried to forget. These sessions were the most difficult. They would sit in Dana's office, the city lights twinkling outside, and share their stories. It was a painful, cathartic process of validation. Isabel spoke of the suggestion box. It had started as a joke, a little wooden box Gavin had bought for her desk, but he began to fill it with anonymous-looking notes, typed and printed. "You'd be more successful if you were less aggressive. Maybe try smiling more in meetings. That dress isn't very flattering." He claimed he was just giving her constructive feedback, helping her improve. In reality, he was systematically eroding her confidence, one paper cut at a time. As Isabel told the story, she saw Sophie's face go pale. Sophie reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She smoothed it out on the table. It was a typed note. "A curator should be mysterious, not loud. Try to cultivate a quieter presence." "He put it in my coat pocket last week," Sophie whispered. "He said he was just trying to help my career." The shared experience was chilling. It was proof of his deeply ingrained pattern, a script he used on any woman who threatened to outshine him. Sophie, in turn, shared the story of her birthday. Gavin had thrown her a lavish surprise party, inviting all her friends and colleagues from the art world. It seemed like a wonderfully romantic gesture, but throughout the night, he had followed her around, whispering critiques in her ear. "You're talking to that gallery owner for too long. It looks desperate. Don't drink so much, you're getting flushed. Why are you talking about your own work? Let them ask you questions." By the end of the night, she felt so anxious and self-conscious that she feigned a migraine and locked herself in the bathroom, crying. Gavin later told their friends she had a bout of social anxiety, and he had to take care of her. He had turned his sabotage into an act of heroism. "He did the same thing to me at the AIA Awards ceremony," Isabel said, her voice barely audible. "The night I won the biggest award of my career. He told me my speech was a little self-congratulatory and that I hadn't thanked him enough. He made my greatest professional triumph feel like a personal failure." Dana listened to it all, her pen flying across her legal pad. "This is coercive control," she stated, her voice firm. "It's a pattern of behavior designed to intimidate, isolate, and control. It's harder to prove than a punch in the face. But with both of your testimonies, showing the exact same pattern, it becomes a powerful narrative. We're not just refuting his lies anymore. We're showing the court who the real abuser is." Their case was becoming stronger every day. They had the recordings of Gavin admitting to faking evidence. They had the financial records proving his infidelity. And now, they had the parallel testimonies of two women detailing an identical, insidious pattern of psychological abuse. The whiteboard in the conference room was no longer just a web of lies. It was a tapestry of truth. Each sticky note, each transcribed quote, each credit card statement was a thread. And together, Isabel and Sophie were weaving them into a net they planned to drop on Gavin Ward in the middle of the courtroom for the entire world to see. The only question was whether they could hold it together long enough, and whether Sophie could survive in the lion's den until it was time to strike. As the court date loomed, a palpable sense of dread began to permeate their secret alliance. The closer they got to exposing Gavin, the more erratic and dangerous he became. The noose was tightening, but it felt as though it were around all three of their necks. Gavin could sense a shift. He didn't know what it was, but Isabel's newfound silence was unnerving him. He had expected her to lash out, to feed the media frenzy with angry denials, to prove his narrative correct. Instead, there was nothing. Just a dignified, impenetrable quiet. Paparazzi photos showed her calmly walking into her office building, a serene, almost detached expression on her face. This placid version of Isabel was a variable he hadn't accounted for, and it was making him paranoid. His paranoia, inevitably, was directed at Sophie. She was his sounding board, his confidant, the one person he believed was entirely under his control. Her performance had to be flawless. "She's planning something," he'd rant, pacing the floor of their immaculate apartment while Sophie sat, feigning sympathetic concern, her heart hammering against her ribs. The burner phone, tucked deep inside a sofa cushion, would be recording everything. "She's too quiet. It's not like her. That bitch is always plotting." Sophie would murmur soothingly, "Maybe she's just given up, Gav. You've already won. Everyone can see the truth." It was a line that both placated his ego and encouraged him to brag, to reveal more of his hand. "Of course, I've won," he'd sneer, his arrogance overriding his fear. "The case is airtight. That photo of the bruise? A masterpiece. Ellison says the jury practically convicted her the second they saw it. These recordings were gold, but the cost of obtaining them was escalating daily. Gavin's surveillance became suffocating. He'd call her constantly, demanding to know her exact location. He'd show up unannounced at the gallery, his eyes scanning for anyone who might be an enemy. He started referring to her friends as spies, and her family as untrustworthy. He was isolating her, just as he had done to Isabel. The close calls became more frequent and more terrifying. One afternoon, Sophie was in the bathroom, transferring the latest audio files from the burner phone to a micro SD card, when Gavin suddenly began banging on the door. "Sophie, what are you doing in there? Who are you talking to?" His voice was sharp, accusatory. Her blood ran cold. She fumbled with the tiny card, her fingers suddenly clumsy. She managed to shove the phone into the hollowed-out back of a bottle of bath salts and drop the card into her pocket just as he used a coin to unlock the door from the outside. He stood there, his eyes narrowed with suspicion, taking in the scene. "I heard you whispering," he said. "I was on the phone with my mother," she lied, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "She's not feeling well." He stared at her for a long, agonizing moment, his gaze sweeping the room. He didn't believe her, but he couldn't prove otherwise. "You spend too much time talking to your mother," he said finally, before turning and walking away. Sophie sank to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. She stayed there for 10 minutes, just breathing, her back pressed against the cold porcelain of the tub. The risk was becoming unbearable. She relayed the incident to Isabel and Dana during an emergency meeting in a noisy food court at the mall, the anonymity of the crowd providing a strange sort of cover. "You have to get out of there," Isabel insisted, her face pale with worry. "This has gone too far. We have enough evidence. It's not worth your life." "If I leave now, he'll know," Sophie countered, her voice low and urgent. "He'll suspect everything. He'll destroy the evidence. He'll run. All of this will have been for nothing. I have to see it through. We're too close." Dana, ever the strategist, looked grim. "She's right. If she leaves him now, we lose the element of surprise. Our entire case hinges on him being blindsided by her testimony. But Sophie, your safety is paramount. We need a contingency plan, an escape route." They spent the next hour devising one. Sophie packed a small go-bag, cash, a change of clothes, her real passport, the collection of micro SD cards, and hid it at the back of her locker at the gallery. She gave Dana a key. She shared her phone's location with Isabel and Dana through a secure app on the burner phone. If she sent a code word, Sunflower, they were to call the police and get her out immediately. The final week before the hearing was the worst. Gavin was a pressure cooker, and the valve was about to blow. He drank heavily every night, his mood swinging wildly from maudlin self-pity to explosive rage. Sophie felt like she was defusing a bomb, every word, every gesture carrying the potential for detonation. The night before the hearing, he was at his most volatile. He had been drinking whiskey since 5 o'clock, and his eyes were glazed, his movements jerky. He sat across from Sophie in the dimly lit living room, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Tomorrow," he slurred, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Tomorrow, Isabel Hart officially becomes nothing. A footnote. The crazy bitch who thought she could be better than me." Sophie stayed silent, her hands clenched in her lap. The burner phone was recording from its hiding place inside a large potted plant. "You know, you're so much better than her," he continued, his gaze turning on Sophie. It was a look that once would have thrilled her, but now it just made her skin crawl. "You're compliant. You know your place. You understand that I am the artist. You're the canvas." He stood up and staggered towards her, grabbing her chin, forcing her to look at him. His breath was sour with whiskey. "But don't you ever, ever think of crossing me," he whispered, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Because I can destroy you just as easily as I destroyed her. Do you understand me?" Sophie's survival instincts took over. She put her hand on his chest, her expression soft, adoring. "Of course, Gav. I would never cross you. I'm on your side, always." The answer seemed to satisfy him. He grunted, releasing her chin and stumbling towards the bedroom. Sophie waited until she heard him snoring before she allowed herself to breathe. She retrieved the phone from the plant, her hands shaking as she stopped the recording. It was the final piece, the ultimate proof of his malevolence, his God complex, his threats. She sent a simple text to Isabel and Dana. "I have what we need. See you tomorrow." She then deleted the message, turned off the burner phone, and sat in the darkness, waiting for the dawn. The noose was tight, but tomorrow she would be the one to pull it. The courtroom was a tinderbox of anticipation. Every seat was filled. The reporters in the back were practically vibrating with excitement, their pens poised. Gavin Ward sat beside his lawyer, Noah Ellison, looking the picture of calm confidence. He gave a small, sad smile to a sympathetic-looking juror. He was in his element, the star of his own tragic play. Isabel sat beside Dana, a strange sense of serenity washing over her. The fear and anxiety of the past few months had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She glanced across the aisle at Gavin. He was so sure of his victory, so wrapped up in his own lies, that he had no idea the world was about to be ripped out from under him. Ellison was in the middle of his closing arguments, his voice booming through the silent room. He was painting a vivid, horrifying picture of Isabel as a violent, unhinged monster. And so, we see a clear, undeniable pattern of abuse, he declared, gesturing dramatically towards Isabel. A woman so consumed by her own ambition that she sought to destroy the man who loved her. A man whose only crime was caring too much. We ask you to look at Gavin Ward and see not just a victim, but a survivor. And we ask you to give him the justice he so richly deserves. He sat down, a smug look on his face. The room was still, the jury's eyes filled with a mixture of pity for Gavin and contempt for Isabel. "The defense calls its final witness," Dana said, her voice clear and steady. She stood and faced the judge. "We call Sophie Lang to the stand." A confused murmur rippled through the courtroom. Gavin's head snapped up, his confident smirk faltering. He looked at Ellison, who simply shrugged, equally bewildered. This was not on the witness list. This was not part of the plan. All eyes turned to the back of the courtroom as Sophie entered. She walked down the central aisle, her heels clicking decisively on the marble floor. She was wearing a simple navy blue dress. Her hair was pulled back, her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, and her expression was one of absolute, unwavering purpose. She looked directly at Gavin, and for the first time, he saw her not as his compliant canvas, but as a stranger. A threat. Panic flickered in his eyes. He leaned over, whispering furiously to Ellison, who was frantically flipping through his notes. Sophie took the stand, was sworn in, and sat down, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Miss Lang," Dana began, her voice gentle, "you are the current partner of Mr. Gavin Ward, is that correct?" "Yes," Sophie said. "And you live with him?" "Yes. Mr. Ward has testified in this court that he is a victim of abuse, that he is a man living in fear. In the time you have known him, have you found him to be a man who is fearful, timid, or easily intimidated?" Ellison shot to his feet. "Objection? Relevance? The witness's opinion of Mr. Ward's character is not at issue. It is when his entire case is built on his portrayal of himself as a victim," Dana countered smoothly. "The jury has a right to know if that portrayal is accurate." "I'll allow it," Judge Monroe said, her eyes fixed on Sophie. "Answer the question, Ms. Lang." "No," Sophie said, her voice ringing with clarity. "Gavin is not timid. He is the most confident, controlling, and arrogant man I have ever met." A gasp went through the gallery. Gavin's face was turning a blotchy red. "In fact," Dana continued, "is it not true that Mr. Ward frequently brags about his ability to manipulate people?" "Objection!" Ellison yelled. "Overruled!" the judge snapped. "Yes," Sophie said, her eyes locked on the jury. "He calls it his superpower. He's very proud of it." Dana walked towards the clerk, holding a small digital audio player. "Your Honor, I would like to play a series of audio recordings for the court. They were made by Ms. Lang over the past 3 weeks." Ellison was apoplectic. "Objection! Illegal recordings, invasion of privacy. We have no idea if these are authentic." "The recordings were made by a party to the conversation, which is legal in this state," Dana said calmly. "And we have a forensic audio expert ready to testify to their authenticity. They are recordings of Mr. Ward, in his own words, discussing this very case." The judge hesitated for a moment, then nodded to the clerk. "Proceed." The first recording filled the room. It was the one from the night before. Gavin's slurred, menacing voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls. Don't you ever think of crossing me, because I can destroy you just as easily as I destroyed her. Do you understand me? The jury's head swiveled from the speakers to Gavin, whose face had gone from red to a pasty white. He looked like he was going to be sick. Dana played the next clip. It was Gavin bragging about the photoshopped bruise. I just enhanced the color a little in Photoshop. Made it look angrier. People believe what they see, baby. And the next about paying off the witness. Nicole was easy. A little cash. She'd have said Isabel was a satanic cult leader if I'd asked her to. And the final, most damning one, about the broken vase. And he admitted he broke it himself months before and saved the pieces. He said he cut his own arm on a shard to make it look like he'd been hit with flying glass. With each clip, another nail was hammered into the coffin of Gavin's lies. The atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed. The sympathy was gone, replaced by a palpable, collective shock and disgust. When the last recording ended, a profound silence fell over the room. Dana turned back to Sophie. Ms. Lang, why did you make these recordings? Why did you risk your own safety to come here today? Sophie took a deep breath and looked directly at Isabel. For a moment, it was just the two of them in the room. 2 survivors. Then she turned to the jury, her voice thick with emotion but steady as a rock. Because he was doing it to me, too, she said. The lies, the control, the threats. He was isolating me, breaking me down, turning me into a person I didn't recognize. I saw my future in Isabel's past. And I knew that if I didn't do something, if I didn't speak the truth, he would just keep doing this to woman after woman. He doesn't just want to win. He wants to annihilate. I came here today because I refuse to be annihilated. And I refuse to stand by and watch him do it to anyone else. She then pulled up the sleeve of her dress, revealing the faint, yellowish remnant of the bruise on her forearm. He gave me this, she said quietly. When he was calming me down, it was over. Isabel knew it. The jury knew it. Even Ellison knew it. He had slumped in his chair, his face ashen, making no move to cross-examine. Gavin Ward, the master storyteller, had finally lost control of the narrative. He sat there, exposed and pathetic, a monster unmasked not by his enemies, but by the woman he thought he owned. The gavel fell, but this time it sounded like the tolling of a bell, signaling the end of his reign of lies. The verdict was a formality. The judge dismissed the case against Isabel with prejudice, meaning Gavin could never bring the same charges against her again. But the real consequences for Gavin were just beginning. As he tried to exit the courthouse, he was met not by adoring reporters, but by 2 grim-faced detectives. The district attorney, spurred by the audio evidence and Sophie's testimony, had opened an investigation into Gavin for perjury, witness tampering, and domestic assault. The hunter had become the hunted. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of vindication. The same gossip blogs that had dragged Isabel's name through the mud were now falling over themselves to print retractions and apologies. The headlines now read, "Philanthropist Gavin Ward exposed as manipulative fraud." And "The Unlikely Alliance, How 2 Women Brought Down a Tyrant." Clients who had postponed projects called back, their voices full of embarrassed apologies. Friends who had drifted away reappeared, bearing gifts and heartfelt mea culpas. Isabel accepted their apologies with grace, but something inside her had shifted. The ordeal had been a painful filter, showing her who her true friends were. Her circle was smaller now, but it was stronger. She and Sophie navigated the strange, surreal landscape of the aftermath together. They were an odd, celebrated pair, the wife and the mistress, now inextricably linked in the public eye. They did one single televised interview, not for the fame, but to control their own narrative once and for all. Sitting side by side on a plush sofa, they told their story with quiet dignity. They didn't sensationalize the abuse. They spoke of the patterns of coercive control, the insidious nature of gaslighting, the importance of believing women. They spoke not as victims, but as advocates. After the interview, Sophie decided to leave New York. "I need a fresh start," she told Isabel over coffee one afternoon. "A place where I'm not that woman from the trial. I want to be just Sophie again." She had accepted a job curating a new museum in Seattle. Their goodbye at the airport was emotional. These two women, brought together by the worst kind of betrayal, had forged a bond that transcended friendship. It was a sisterhood born in the trenches. "Thank you," Isabel said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You saved my life." "We saved each other," Sophie replied, pulling her into a fierce hug. "Now go be the brilliant architect you were always meant to be. No more shadows." And Isabel did. She threw herself back into her work, but with a new perspective. Her ambition was no longer a frantic, hungry thing, but a calm, centered passion. Her designs became bolder, more authentic. She stopped caring about what other people thought and started building things that she, herself, loved. She won more awards, but this time, the validation came from within. She reclaimed her life, piece by piece. She started hiking on the weekends, feeling the solid earth beneath her feet. She reconnected with her family, letting herself be cared for. She even started dating again, cautiously at first. Her new partner was a kind, gentle literature professor who listened more than he talked and who celebrated her successes as if they were his own. He wasn't a fixer or a savior. He was just a partner. One evening, about a year after the trial, Isabel was working late in her studio. The city glittered outside her window, no longer a mocking reminder of her isolation, but a beautiful, sprawling testament to possibility. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was a picture from Sophie. The photo showed Sophie standing on a windswept beach on the Pacific coast, her arms thrown wide, a joyful, unburdened smile on her face. The caption read, "Finally found myself. Turns out she was here all along." Isabel smiled, a genuine, deep-from-the-soul smile. She typed back a simple reply. "She's pretty amazing, isn't she?" She put her phone down and looked at the blueprints spread across her desk. It was a design for a new women's shelter, a project she had taken on pro bono. It was full of light and open spaces, designed to be a sanctuary, a place of safety and healing. A place to begin again. The scars from Gavin's war would always be a part of her, faint lines on the map of her life. But they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders of her own resilience, of the strength she found in the most unexpected of places. She had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged. She was not just a survivor. She was the architect of her own, beautiful, authentic life. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt as limitless as the sky. That was the story of Isabel and Sophie, a powerful reminder that our greatest strength can be found when we have the courage to speak our truth, even when our voice shakes. Their journey shows us that the cages we find ourselves in are often built by the people we trust the most. But the key to our freedom can sometimes come from the most unexpected ally. This story is for anyone who has ever felt silenced, manipulated, or lost in someone else's narrative. If their story of resilience and unexpected connection moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true-to-life stories that empower and inspire. Thank you for watching.